to talk with, all by myself. No one to walk with, but I'm happy on the shelf. A misbehaving, saving my love for you, for you, for you, for you. I know for certain the one I love. I'm through with flirting, it's you that I'm thinking of. A misbehaving, saving my love for you. Like Jack Horner in the corner, don't go nowhere. What do I care? Your kisses are worth waiting for. Believe me, I don't stay out late, no place to go. I'm home about 8, just me and my radio. Ain't misbehaving, saving all my love for you. I don't stay up late, got no place to go. I'm home about 8, just me and my radio. Ain't misbehaving, saving my love for you.
The evening breeze caressed the trees tenderly. The trembling trees embraced the breeze tenderly. Then you and I came wandering by, and lost in a sigh were we. The shore was kissed by sea and mist tenderly. I can't forget how two hearts met breathlessly. Your arms, oh opened wide and closed me inside. You took my lips, you took my love so tenderly.
The evening breeze erased the trees tenderly. Trembling trees embraced the breeze tenderly. Then you and I came wandering by and lost in the sight were we. Oh, the shores were kissed by the mist tenderly. Papa did in, I can't forget our two hearts met tenderly. Papa, that your arms open wide and closed me inside. You took my chops away from bops tenderly.
Oh, tenderly. Oh,